Welcome everybody to our quarterly webinar. My name is Seher Gattas. I'm Senior Vice President at Data Stealth here. I'm dialing from our Mississauga office. That's our headquarters in Canada. We operate internationally. But more importantly, I have two amazing guests with me today. First of all, we'll start with our guest, Robert Spivak. Robert, thank you for joining. Robert is the Director of Business Development for Control Gap. Control Gap is one of the largest QSAs in North America, and I can say worldwide. Actually, they are our QSA as well. Also with Robert, I have my Chief Product Officer, Thomas. Thomas, thank you for joining us today. We're going to have a very engaging session. So here's heads up for all the audience joining. And by the way, we have more joining right now. First, prepare your questions, especially when it comes to PCI 4.0 and the requirements. Second, we want to make sure that this conversation is meaningful. We're going to be sharing best practice and a lot of things that we have seen with our clients. So, team, I hope you're ready to go. Awesome. Okay. So maybe, Robert, I will start with you. This is the first question that comes to mind, and I'm sure you guys will continue, you and Thomas, with more conversation. First question I always hear from my clients is, what are you really seeing in your engagement, especially around script management for mid-sized and large organizations when it comes to the PCI 4.0 preparation?
Thank you for that, sir. You're absolutely right. With the advent of PCI DSS 4.0 and now 4.01, the new iteration that's just recently come out, one of the biggest things that we're running into, among other more challenging requirements, is how do I handle requirement 643 and a couple other requirements when it comes to my script management on e-commerce sites. We found many organizations have a variety of different implementations when it comes to their e-commerce environment, with the way that they've implemented their payment pages and the different vendors that they use. And it could be a very small footprint of maybe a few sites, maybe a couple of redirection servers, to large enterprises that are working in AWS, GCP, Azure, maybe even using Docker containers and a variety of other platforms. So the problem can be relatively small and academic, or it could be quite complex. And the sooner you start looking at these requirements, the better. Thomas, from your perspective and being a PCI compliant service provider that's dealing with some of these things, what are you seeing in the industry?
Yeah, so you've covered sort of the range that we see, right? When we look at client engagements, we're going to have clients coming to us with a handful of pages, and within those pages, let's call it a handful of scripts. What we're seeing on average is anywhere between 50 to 80 scripts on a payment page, which is a lot, right? And we're talking about all the different types of scripts combined. So we're seeing some relatively straightforward environments all the way to very large, very complex environments, particularly some with single page applications, that with the dynamics of single page applications, that every action is going to load one or more scripts, depending on the path you take. We've had clients where the page loads and you have 7-8 scripts. By the time you make it to the payment page, you get to 150, 200 scripts, sometimes even more. Right. So I would say it's a very broad range of complexity that we're seeing in terms of pages. But then when we start double clicking into what we see in those environments, there's certain things that obviously we have best practices and recommendation against. So we've had clients where we could see sensitive information hard-coded into the script, credentials, for example, which obviously is very delicate. Other things we saw as well was misconfigured scripts or misunderstood or misinterpreted scripts. Clients coming to us, we give them an inventory of all the scripts on their page. They come back and they say, oh, that's a marketing script, but we double click on it and it turns out it's not a marketing script. It's actually doing something else. Right. And that really brings something that I think we should talk about at some point, and that's how those requirements, starting with 643, right, that inventory of script, is going to span far beyond what PCI typically did at an organization within a merchant.
Absolutely. I agree with you, Thomas. One of the big things that we're running into is certainly most organizations want to start with PCI. What's the PCI world? Where's my scope? how do I minimize the effort to meet the requirements? But in reality, this is something that is broader. It should be something more of a general security practice, because as you'll find with that payment page, if it's content managed or it's part of a bigger framework, you're going to find other pages that are either loading the same types of scripts, or they may be scripts that lead into that payment page, or within the page itself where you have an iframe where you're coming into that specific iframe. And for those in the audience that may understand the SAQA applicability, which is where this is affecting the majority of merchants and service providers, the key thing here is that with an iframe, which is the SAQ sort of applicability, it allows you to reduce your PCI footprint by having information sourced from a third party into that iframe. And really, it's the iframe environment that you're worried about. But as with everything in the web, there are scripts that are attached to that iframe and to the payment page in general. And that's where the delivery to the consumer, which is what we're talking about in more the protection phase, there are different ways to apply that. And from an organizational perspective, you should really take a broader approach to it. And this could apply to healthcare, to insurance, to government agencies, anybody that's collecting any kind of private data, which may be connected with PCI data. But we're recommending to many of our customers, fine, if you want to start with PCI to begin with, just to get the infrastructure in place, get the right tools and processes in place, then let's expand that to a much broader conversation.
No, and I think you're bringing some very important points, right? So one, the applicability to all SAQs, right? To the iframe, and for some organizations that currently do not use an iframe and are looking to do that, to perhaps move into an SAQA, for example, there's also a certain order of operations as well, because the injection of this iframe is going to inject scripts. So there's a certain order in terms of, you want to do tamper detection on your scripts, but you're about to inject another script in. Let's do it in the right sequence of events.
One other thing I want to just add on top of that is everyone talks about the scripts itself, but in requirement 11, there's a new requirement that talks about protection of the page in itself, right? So the tool that you're looking for should be able to not only deal with the script issue you have, but also the overall code of your web page to be able to provide that protection on the code, ensuring that it is being properly maintained, the integrity of that code is being handled, therefore your consumer's protected and you're meeting those requirements. So it does evolve and it does get a little more broader when we talk about not just scripts, but the overall page itself.
Yeah, absolutely. You bring a really good point. So you have, the page leading to the page, right? The page leading to the iframe that is in scope, that complexity with all the headers as well. And how do you deal with certain aspects of scripts? And without going too deeply within the technicality of it, with the different types of scripts that you see on a page, inline scripts, first-party scripts, third and nth-party scripts, the treatment is not going to be the same for all of them. And so you have what we see with clients is they're faced with, one, what is the best way to protect the page and then protect everything, all the content on that page? But before they even get there, as they look at the 643 inventory, one of the questions they have is, well, I've built my entire site using this template. And this template, or all my payment pages, rely on the same template. This template pulls a bunch of scripts that are then going to be propagated across all my pages. Is there a way for me to remove a script that I cannot justify, either through business reasons or technology, that I cannot justify to my auditor, so that when the pages reaches the consumer, it reaches the consumer's browser with those scripts that I could not justify completely removed, without me going back and working with my application team or my engineering team to go and make that change and deploy that change. And that's something that we can tackle, dynamically as the content goes from the server to the consumer's browser, to help facilitate as well the treatment of those pages, so that whatever gets to the consumer's browser has had proper justification, either business or technical, in inclusion of or including the page leading to the page.
Absolutely. You've made a great point. A lot of organizations will work with third parties to develop their sites. that becomes a little more complex because they may be loading scripts that you're unaware of. So having that initial inventory, understanding the script name, the origin, who the vendor is that supports it, the version number, and as you said, the justification is important because that will then give you the ability to say, yes, these are the scripts that we should be running, or do we need additional scripts? One of the tangents, if you will, when it comes to this, not just the script, but the web page is because scripts can be created by various vendors and maybe either resold or included by yet another vendor, you have a challenge with your 12.8 requirements when it comes to third-party management, because some of these vendors will now potentially be in scope for your third-party management to verify, are they producing code in a compliant manner? Are they handling that? Is it your responsibility to handle the validation of that vendor, or is your vendor taking care of that in their responsibilities? So it can become a bit of a rat's nest, if you will, in the different ways that it connects and the different things you need to do. One of the key things I will bring up is you need to speak to your assessor or a QSA, because they will help you to be able to define where the scope is, where the boundaries are. I know you mentioned like connected pages, but there is guidance from the council that the QSA should be aware of and should be up to date on, and it keeps changing on a regular basis. So it's important to make sure that you talk to a QSA or talk to your acquirer or the brands, depending on what your relationships are, and just make sure that you define the boundaries correctly. And then once you've got that sorted out to meet the PCI requirements, then take a more broader cybersecurity or cyber risk type of approach to say, should we do this for all of our sites, regardless of which ones they are? Know what kind of scripts are running. And to your point, do we have any hard-coded usernames and passwords? That's actually not part of requirement 8, where you shouldn't be having that. And in proper web development in OWASP top 10, again, hard-coded credentials are not something that is typically allowed, or it's considered a vulnerability. So those are the kinds of things you need to think of. And PCI in many cases says you should do security and then layer on PCI. And that's really the approach you should be taking with this script management functionality and website management functionality.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And the importance of that third-party management, right? So yes, 12.8, but even from a strictly operational perspective. So you're looking at, I'll go back a little bit on the technology. So like for some scripts, you're going to use an SRI tag, a sub-resource integrity tag. It may be applicable to some, won't be applicable to others. And that's a very sort of well-intentioned way of securing some of those scripts. But when you do not control the software lifecycle of those scripts, things can become far more complicated. So you have the sort of overarching due diligence on the vendors themselves. What are their PCI processes and so on? Like, do they provide some type of responsibility matrix? That's great. But then from an operational standpoint, now I have my page, my payment pages, they have 50, 60 different scripts, some of which are made by a variety of vendors, right? All the analytics vendors you can think of, yes. Without naming names. Those vendors can be pushing a new release every week, every day, every month. It's their prerogative. They just push whatever update they want, whenever they want. That update is going to change the code, is going to change the script itself. So how do you want to handle this? Because now you knew version 125, version 126 just got pushed without you knowing about it. And if we look at 11.6.1, you're supposed to prevent that content from reaching the consumer's browser. You want to do that without impacting the business, because if I don't push that script and I block the page, my client cannot pay for what he was ready to pay.
Or they may get a weird
or they may get a weird
out of it.
Yeah, they may get a weird experience. They may be spooked by that experience too, wondering what's happening.
Yeah, is it a hack site?
Exactly.
I think you make a good point. Is everyone has different agile cycles, waterfall cycles when it comes to software development. So ultimately, you're not going to manage all those different cycles in your own. But yes, you need to then take a look at, is your release management now affected by the way that they deploy these. And I think there's going to be a lot of eye-opening experiences. I know we've had it with many of our clients to say, I had no idea this was on here. I didn't realize the complexity, as you said, the click-through when we went through, and upwards of 400 scripts when you go through all the layers, and they're going, how did this happen? And it's just convenience. There's no one's done anything malicious or wrong. It's things have happened over time. And now it's time to clean up this particular area because it is becoming a more prevalent attack vector for malicious users. They've realized that if they can get in between you and your consumer, they can hack the consumer, which is really where they want to be and get that information. They don't necessarily have to hit the main servers because they know you've put those protection mechanisms to be able to protect the overall infrastructure and be a lot more secure. But supporting multiple browsers, you know, your Safaris, your Chromes, your Edge, and DuckDuckGo, and all the rest. I'm not endorsing any of them, just saying there's lots out there in the market, Firefox, all those. So ultimately, you can't control all of that, but you have to be able to protect what's being downloaded to your consumer browsers. So being able to do that in an effective and efficient way is going to make your challenge not only to meet PCI, but overall security in this arena a lot simpler.
Yeah, and in some of the discussions we're having with clients, and I'd love to get your take on it and see if you're hearing similar things. We see that they have built they've built their website and everything leading to the payment page in a way that would optimize user experience. And as a result, they reverted to things like SPAs or more monolithic approaches. We've had one organization we're talking to, for example, and that fits right in, that was saying, well, we've implemented those tools that allow the marketing team to do A/B testing.
Right.
And they have this pipe. They can push whatever change they want whenever they want. And that's great. And obviously, the goal there is not to prevent this from happening, but making sure it happens where it is meant to happen. Right. And so when you think about your payment page, all the pages that will get you there, you know, the experience you're going to get, filling the cart, reading reviews, whatever the case may be. If you want to do some A/B testing on this, perfect, go at it. Once you get to the payment page, perhaps consider this one more in isolation. Eliminate some of those scripts that you have there, because how much A/B testing are you actually going to do on the payment page itself? You know the information that needs to be entered. Whether you enter one, like the card number first and the CVV second, or there won't be much change there. Right. And then continue your A/B testing afterwards in terms of confirmation pages, for example, that can then lead to upsell, cross-sell, you know, whichever the business requirements you have or the needs of the business you have. But think of that more as an asset that needs to be more secure, because it will directly or indirectly get in contact with payment information. And this is some of the conversation that we're starting to see happen. Obviously, for some organization, it's easier than others. Those that have a significant historical baggage, if you will, or a significant infrastructure that was built over the years, they're more challenged by it. But directionally, we're starting to see this. We want to continue to fulfill the needs of the business, meet PCI compliance without having to now synchronize with everybody, right? That third-party vendor is pushing a new release. Oh, but wait, marketing's doing an A/B test. All this is going to change the page that gets to the consumer. Well, let's do this before payment, after payment, but for the payment, let's go as vanilla can be.
Absolutely, and you've made a very good point around the strategy that many organizations are doing. In the past, everyone wanted to have everything in-house. Yeah, I want to keep all my servers in-house because I can protect them better. I can do my web development better. I can make sure that everything I have is secure. But in this day and age, with resource-strapped organizations or potentially cost benefits to be able to go to a third party, many organizations are looking at, as you said, how do I build that wall around my payment function, whether that's a page, whether that's redirecting to a third party, let them handle all the payment stuff, everything to do with my payments. I'm just going to have a way to go from A out to there, and then I can handle my web environment. I can handle all my marketing the way I want to, and I can deal with all those things. There are sometimes business cases where that's not possible. Either it's because of the vendors they are using, they don't support certain functionality, or potentially there are business or legislative or regulatory reasons why they cannot do that. And really that's up to your organization to talk to your finance team, talk to your QSA, talk to your bank about what are any restrictions that you may have to be concerned about, what kind of constraints you may have when it comes to building your infrastructure. But ultimately, you want to be able to minimize that area that it does apply to. Some of the new FAQs that are being released by the council are starting to clarify a little bit more about these requirements, because when they were initially released, they were very broad. They didn't have a lot of context around them. So they were left to some interpretations. And now we're getting a lot more clarity from the council. So definitely reach out to QSA. You can reach out to us or to Data Stealth. We're happy to bridge conversations with the right people to be able to help you understand where that scope lives and where do you really need to deal with these particular requirements. That's where I'm really seeing a lot with our clients, is they're just looking for ways to eliminate it, or if they do need to keep it, really shrink it down. In one case, we actually have one customer where they're building a PCI payment environment, if you will, and all internal servers will redirect into that. So that way, to your point, marketing can do what they need to do, finance can do what they need to do, downstream process of reporting, it's completely innocuous as far as the organization is concerned. It's inside a secure network, but that payment is kind of the bastion host in this little secured area that everybody goes into, and it's only one direction in and out, which I think ultimately was the council's original thought process when it came to e-commerce, is you should have this iron solid, Fort Knox type of area where you want to do payments. Everything else doesn't matter, and you're not really doing much connectivity into it, or eliminating connectivity where it's absolutely not necessary to only the servers that would have to connect directly into that payment environment. And it's very restrictive.
Yeah, and I think, great point. And I think what makes sort of the flexibility of the solution and the engagement with your internal assessor or QSA so critical is building an isolated, Fort Knox, to use your terminology, environment is great, but it's not going to be accessible to all merchants out there. For some of them, it's just too big of a lift to get there. And so how can you find a solution that's going to be flexible enough to protect that consumer's browser, whatever reaches the consumer's browser, without having to resort to the larger lift of creating that secure environment and isolating all the services and then feeding the information into the different branches of the organization. And so we're seeing all these different
You're
shades
definitely
of
making
gray.
a good point. There is the other two big factors, of course, with every business is how easy is the integration? Is it going to take me 6 months to put this in, or can I get it in 30 days? And is it cost effective, right? If it's going to be so cost prohibitive that I'm going to be out of business, then I'm not going to take it, right? I've seen a lot of different models in how organizations and vendors are doing that. So definitely take a look at how they're charging for the service or how it's being integrated. These are all very important questions, because the deadline is March 2025 to have this implemented. The idea here is that many organizations are going to complete their annual report on compliance or their SAQs to buy themselves additional time, which is wonderful. You certainly have that ability because it's not going to be verified until your next cycle. However, the expectation from the council and the brands and everyone else is that post March 2025, you're going to be either having this implemented or you're being close to it. The idea being that prior to that, you have it implemented, you're doing your ASV scans if it's applicable and you need to do them. So all those 40 requirements that come into effect as of March 2025, you really need to understand that, and doing an impact assessment or a gap assessment around that to understand what's really affecting you, even if it's just the web environment or your overall organization. Understanding that and putting a roadmap together on how you're going to get there is really important. It allows you not only the lead time to plan, resource, get budget, do all the things you need to do as an organization. And to your point, those that may be resource strapped can then take a look for who can help us to come up with an elegant solution that's going to solve a lot of those questions.
Yes, and the timing and the planning, as you mentioned, is actually quite critical, right? Because comes April 1, 2025, you need to enforce, right? So there's going to need to be that blocking. And so if you haven't figured out internally those different communication channel between the different teams when a new version is going to get pushed and things like that, then you may face a harsher result with a page not being delivered to the consumer's browser as a result of a miscommunication or missed communication internally. So the sooner you, and that's the message we convey to our clients, is the sooner you begin, the sooner you roll out a solution, and the sooner you're going to be able to look at these alerts. So roll out a solution, roll it out in alert only mode. So if a script has been modified, if a page has been modified and you are unaware of it, have it notify you. Look back and understand whether it was that miscommunication internally or something else. Right. If it was miscommunication, engage with the teams, figure out what the right process is, so that perhaps they don't do a push whenever they want. They have a scheduled push, and that's something you can plan accordingly with the tool, so that as you get closer to that date, you can see a decline in those events that result from internal miscommunication or miscommunication with the third-party vendors that you're engaged with. And when the time comes for you to enforce, you have those issues sorted out. You have those processes ironed out. The longer you wait.
Right. The idea here is that if you have a SOC, Secure Operations Center provider, that you want to take that alerting and give you the actioning, a NOC for Network Operations Center, in the larger organizations, or you're using a third party to help you support that, you're absolutely right. It's not only just implementing the tool and saying, okay, we're done. It's what are the downstream processes? How are we going to know if something's happening, and how do we react to it? Do we need an incident response plan that if this happens, how are we going to react to it? So although these requirements seem very much in a vacuum, they have these outlying tentacles that connect to a lot of other PCI requirements that you need to consider when I'm doing this. How will we not only implement, how will we make sure that we detect, as you say, to start, and then eventually prevent. But even if it's preventing, we want to know, because if we're being attacked or there's something happening, or maybe it's a misconfigured script, as you said, or a corrupted script, we want to be able to do something in an incident response to go correct that, make sure that we've solved the issue and eliminated those alerts as they come through. So yeah. Good point.
Yeah, 100%. And another point you made, which has been the topic of many conversations, was around, the browser support, right? And if we look at the intention, or at least my read of the intent from the council, is really to protect that consumer's browser. Right. But at the same time, as the merchant, you have zero control over what that browser is, or over which platform that browser is running on. Right. Could be a mobile device, could be a laptop, a desktop, doesn't matter, right? And so the approach that we've seen some vendors take had to do with relying essentially on the consumer's browser adequately responding to triggers, or adequately processing scripts and potentially blocking scripts. My read of this, and I'd be curious to get your thought, is if it works in 91, 92% of the case, it's better than it was before, but there's still that 8% that's problematic, right? And so the approach, for instance, that we're taking is look at all those different threat actors or threat vectors and address them before the page gets delivered to the consumer's browser, so that there is zero reliance on the consumer's browser doing the right thing, so the outcome expected by the council is the one that the consumer is going to get. And we see this too as a much simpler way for auditors to test, right? Because behind all this, there's going to need to be some type of an AOC that comes out. How do you test that a consumer's browser adequately responded to the scripts that were being generated? And do you test all possible browsers, all possible platforms? my guess is that practically, like, there's practical limitations around what you can do, but something I think the audience needs to one, hear about, and two, consider as well in terms of their vendor selection process.
I agree with you. One of the key things with everything in 4.0 is demonstrating the compliance. It's having the policy, having the individuals who are involved in the processes to be able to communicate how they deal with the different things that are there. But then how do you demonstrate that you are meeting that requirement? And in that particular case, you want to ensure that you have the necessary, as you say, testing, or potentially the necessary artifacts that demonstrate these things. I agree with you. There are browsers on your mobile device, on your tablet, on your laptop, on your desktop. Who knows? Google Glasses may have a browser soon enough, for all you know, right? Your Oculus, if you're doing 3D browsing, before you know it, you'll have a browser in there. So ultimately, you want to be able to have a broad spectrum of support for your customers. But just like I think internet banking and other things, you will have to set a limit to what the minimum requirements are for those browsers. But again, you're going to want to make sure that you have the ability to demonstrate that, yes, you are protecting those. And I agree with you in that some organizations are looking at the point of distribution from the web server to make sure that we stop the scripts or prevent them from executing and not rely at all on the browser. Some choose to have a module that gets downloaded with the page that will do some of that. So again, every approach is a little different, and maybe you could talk a little bit about how Data Stealth has decided and the strategy you've taken to be able to handle that type of script management and execution.
Happy to. So, the approach that we decided to take was to essentially look at the page before it reaches the consumer's browser, run an integrity check on the page itself, on all the scripts, but also offer clients the ability to dynamically remove content that they cannot justify. So what that means now is, if I have a templated website, or if I have a single page application, by the time the user gets to the payment page, there's certain scripts that I could not easily remove that the tool Data Stealth will remove from the page, so they don't reach the consumer's browser. We also assumed that we should not expect the consumer's browser to do the right thing. We should assume that the consumer's browser will do whatever they want. And so how do we make it so the spectrum of things they can do is between good and good? And that's by making sure we don't deliver the high risk content into those browsers. So for that, we look at the page, we look at all the scripts on the page, the content of the page. We can dynamically add SRI tags to scripts so that the browser knows to execute them or not. We can dynamically remove scripts. We can also look at third-party scripts and nth-party script, assess those, and make sure that they are properly protected before they reach the consumer's browser.
Now, Thomas, one quick question that I've had a lot of times, and not just with your product, but every product. This is web. We're on the web. I want performance. I want that. I want instantaneous downloads. I want that. So is there any performance hit in being able to turn this on, and what that means to the end consumer?
So great question. The answer to that is no. There is no performance hit. We're really talking about, sub-millisecond type hit on that content, because you're right, we don't want to affect the user experience along the way. So we've put a lot of effort in the performance scalability of the system, as well as minimizing the user impact so that it becomes imperceivable to the user. They cannot notice that it's there. Another big sort of business choice that we made had to do with how the solution is delivered. And we opted with delivering it as a service as opposed to just a product. We are a level 1 service provider, as you know. And so as a result, organizations that utilize Data Stealth will get a RACI and an AOC coming from us as well. Because we've talked about the sort of business impact, marketing, engineering, and so on. We've talked about the technology impact, the tooling. But then there's, what is my PCI impact with 643 and 1161 if I decide to take a product, deploy the product myself, and then produce all those reports myself, right? And for us, the business choice that we made is how can we help our clients have an easier experience with those PCI audits by saying, you know what, for this, lean on us. Our team will take care of it. We'll provide you with the OC, we'll provide you with a RACI. So from your audit perspective, you'll have the documentation you need. You're not completely out of the woods. There's still some things you need to do, but at least for that piece, it's taken care of by our own team.
Well, and I think that's a key thing for any QSA that's doing the validation is having that responsibility matrix that outlines where you're taking on the responsibility versus the merchant or service provider. It makes things a lot easier when it comes to an audit. It makes it more academic to be able to say, these are not applicable because Data Stealth is taking care of those, and there's a certified level 1 PCI service provider through a report on compliance, et cetera. So I think in that particular case, it offers that assurance and that comfort that if I'm implementing this with the right support from Data Stealth, it's going to make the experience a little bit easier, but also my assessment experience a little more academic or more easier because of the fact that I have the information and the support from Data Stealth. So absolutely.
Yeah, no, that's great. Yeah, so that's the approach that that we've taken. You know, in terms of topics, I think we've covered quite a lot of ground. So perhaps, unless you have something to add, perhaps we can go ask Seher, you know, if we've seen any questions come in, and if anybody has questions, by all means, please send them into the Q&A tab in your web interface in the Zoom link.
Absolutely. So first of all, team, I want to thank you so much. I've been getting some questions. I'm just trying my best. I'll do my best to capture all the questions properly. Very engaging conversation. I took notes myself. First question from Rochelle, which I believe you guys answered it already. But the question was exactly, depending on the iframe that's configured from the merchant, either if it's a SAC-A, SAC AEP, or regardless, does this impact how to comply with those requirements?
That's a great question. And from our perspective, whether it's a SAQ-A applicability or AEP, will certainly depend on your integration. I would say talk to your QSA and understand what the scope looks like. But normally the integration in either case should be very uniform. And this is why we talk about not only just doing it there, but also from a broader cyber risk perspective is take a look at all your sites and see if it makes sense to do more. But specifically to that question, whether it's AEP, if you're an SAQD, because you have multiple payment flows, or your service provider, which they're only allowed to do an SAQD, you should be looking to have a uniform implementation to make life a little bit easier for yourself. Hopefully.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I believe it does. I had another question actually from the audience, and I'm going to read it just to make sure I don't miss it. Now, does our solution, Data Stealth solution, work if the iframe is embedded with the merchant checkout page? Sometimes the companies, they update their iframe or code. I believe you guys covered some of that, but just want to, from a Data Stealth, how would we solve for that?
Go ahead, Thomas.
Yeah, so the short answer is yes. You know, we a solution supports that without a problem. I think the consideration for you is it ties back to the discussion we're having around third-party vendors, right? And you have to look at the payment provider as one of those third-party vendors and understand when they're going to be deploying those updates, because that page that is going to lead to their iframe is one that you need to adequately tamper protect and secure. And so you'll need to know when they push that update, but that's where that engagement with the vendor and you know, in working with us, we can certainly figure out the best process and the best solution for you to continue to operate your payment page regardless of when that vendor updates their script and their iframe.
Thank you, Thomas. And also, when I answered the question, I said, like, we're a service provider level 1, so we have a hosted managed solution. That's why when we sit in the middle, we can catch some of the changes as well. You guys mentioned the alert mode versus the block mode. So that's kind of one of the approaches. I just got another question right now from Kerry. How does the principle and scope change if a merchant completes a full page redirect rather than an iFrame implementation?
I'll let you
That's
start that one.
the burning question everybody
Yeah.
has. And it's just recently, I believe as soon as yesterday or last week, the council has released a new FAQ around this. So yes, web redirect, I would say talk to a QSA, just make sure that it's properly scoped. There are certain implementations where when you're looking at a full redirect to a third party, you're really putting the onus of 643 and requirement 11 on them, because it's their site that is actually taking the payment. You're redirecting the entire site over. You're still required to protect the URL itself that is doing the redirect versus an iFrame where, let's say if you have AJAX calls and then that's been built into a script below that, what is being included in that sort of secure zone under the AJAX call or whatever implementation you have, and being able to do that versus what you might call a API redirect. So I'm still collecting all that information on my website. I'm building the API communication and I'm sending it across. That then is an AEP implementation, and you don't necessarily get the scope reduction you're looking for. Hopefully that answers your question.
I believe it does, and I'm still monitoring the Q&A to ensure I'm not missing any. I have a follow-up on that. So let's say if I'm doing a redirect, would I still need to comply with the 643.11.6.1? I know it's an obvious answer, but I want to confirm that we're answering it properly and it's recorded as well.
Please reach out to us. I'm happy to take a look at your full implementation. As a QSA, we get these questions in a vacuum, and there's always some extraneous information that we need. And it's very vanilla in a vacuum, if you're asking me. I would say as a QSA that you likely do not have to, but there are other variables that we need to take a look at. So feel free to reach out to Control Gap or your local QSA. We're happy to have the conversation and just understand what those scope implications are. And we can certainly give you the right guidance that you need to make sure that you make the right decisions for your organization.
Yeah, I think the answer is it depends, right?
Always,
it depends how you
always
do
depends.
It depends how you do it, and that page that is going to do the redirect, you have some responsibility on this, as you mentioned a moment ago. And so temper protecting the URL is going to be key, because if your consumer gets redirected to the wrong payment page, then it is on you for having put that link in your own page.
Yeah, and that's a classic man-in-the-middle attack, right? Attackers will create a similar site. They'll clone your site to make it look almost identical. They will find a way to insert themselves to change that URL to redirect to them. And in some sophisticated cases, they will actually pass the information back to your site. So it'll be almost completely unknown to you that it's happening. And that's been a few breaches have happened that way, where the man in the middle was completely seamless to the organization. And it took years before someone detected, hey, it seems like something weird's happening here. And by then it's too late, because they've been just harvesting the information in line with your organizational website. So those are the types of attacks that you may see. And by all means, look up the OWASP top 10, the OWASP project, OWASP. I think I said that correctly. Yep. They will give you sort of the more common attacks in web if you haven't done it yet. They'll show you things like broken session management, and that's where man in the middle can sometimes come out of play. So definitely there's resources out there. Feel free to reach out to Data Stealth or Control Gap. We'd be happy to give you guys some guidance and some direction wherever we can.
Yeah, and an important consideration there too is, every time you look at running an analysis or any type of statistical analysis on pages, you're always coming across this. If there is this man in the middle attack, one, the information could still flow, or two, that man in the middle may decide whether to attack 100% of the sessions, 50% of the sessions, 5% of the sessions. And the lower that number, the harder they become to detect. Absolutely. And that's how we've seen breaches extending 12, 18, 24 months, because it was affecting a single-digit percentage of the transactions, which was very hard to identify, because compared to last year, did the usage on your payment page go up by 3% or 3.5% or 4%? it's kind of difficult to quantify. You know, your drop-off rate was 0.5% different yesterday. Is it a fluke, or is it something else, right?
As one of my process schools said, you either go big and take a lot at once, or you go a little bit at a time and do it for a very long period of time. So there are different types of attack vectors. Your incident response plan would also that might be something you do as a tabletop as part of your annual PCI requirements, is to take a look at that as a scenario. How do you react to a low volume, but it seems something's weird, versus a high volume? So those are ways that you could test your current infrastructure, test your current controls that are in place to see if they're effective enough. Red teaming events will also do that. So where an offensive security pen tester or a security consultant can actually simulate those kinds of things, and you can see how your systems are reacting, so that you can tune your tools to recognize that behavior and be able to alert you a lot sooner, hopefully preventing a widespread compromise.
Awesome. Great answers. Thank you, team. Robert, that's a question specific for you. In your days when you're consulting with your customers in North America, how do you handle environment that's distributed across regions?
Very good question. And you need to be very methodical in it. You need to understand the flow of the data. And you take it in sizable chunks. As they say, you can only eat an elephant one bite at a time. But ultimately, it is looking at, one, the business process. How is data the card data being collected, processed, and transmitted, and stored anywhere it needs to be? What's the underlying technology in the different regions? And then from there, we can take a look at any common platforms, common strategies that are affecting all the regions. But if they are uniform or different in the different regions, then we need to tackle them one at a time or in parallel, or look at, are there tools or strategies we can do across the board where it makes sense? Again, multiple regions in the world become very difficult because you have different legislative, regulatory, regional requirements, even from the brands. So Visa Europe has specific requirements versus Visa Asia or Visa North America. MasterCard is the same. And with the addition of UPI, Union Pay International, to the PCI Council, in the Pan-Asia area, there's going to be a lot more requirements that maybe organizations aren't prepared for. So that is certainly something that we can handle from Control Gap, and many QSAs can, but we're happy to help you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Robert. Thomas, that's a question for you. And then, by the way, Robert, be ready, because I'll ask you the same question. So Thomas, in our implementation right now, we have been helping a lot of clients with our platform solution as a hosted service provider level 1, especially with requirement 643.1161. My question to you is, with our engineering team, when they're helping our clients, what have you seen? Like, how many scripts really our clients have been having, just so that we can manage that solution for that?
Yeah, so it's the range has been very broad. You know, I would say on average, we've seen anywhere between 45, 50 to 75, 80 scripts. A nice blend of inline, first party, third party. Payment pages with 25 to 30 third-party scripts are quite common. You know, your typical analytics and so on fall into that. But then you can get on the extreme end of the spectrum, where we've seen clients with upwards of 400 scripts. So at that point, you're talking more about a single page application that has so many different paths that allow you to get to the payment, that you have to account for all these scripts. That can be picking an offering, tuning that offering, like configuring options for that offering, for example, all the way down to paying for it. All these add script to the page. So yes, it's gone from 45, 50 all the way to 400 plus. Yeah. What about you?
And I agree with you, Thomas. It's one of those things where I love marketing departments, but sometimes they want way too much information. No offense to any marketing departments. I do marketing too, so I have it. But the Google Tag Managers, the AWS performance metrics, the Google AdWords, I understand that there's a need for it, and those metrics are required. But in many cases, when we do have conversations with either the marketing team, the IT team, the engineering teams, the software development teams, we really ask for that production instance, do you really need these scripts running on it, and what's the justification? And that can be a difficult conversation with your organization because, again, it's, oh, broad spectrum, we need it for everything. When you really take a look at that 1 or 2 pages or that one environment, and you look at the metrics, if you really scale them down and take some time to really investigate this, you may find that they will be in agreement to say, okay, we can live without it in this particular area, but everything else we want. And that's the kind of conversation, that's the type of dialogue you need to have within the organization to be able to say, you know, here, absolutely, we agree it's important. However, in the PCI zone itself, how important is it? Because a lot of the marketing is outside of it. A lot of the, as you said, rebranding or upselling happens outside of just the payment environment. Yes, there's probably some information that can be shared, but it should be very limited, and it should exclude any of the payment information that you're collecting at that point, because you're just creating scope. As we know, wherever the payment data flows, that creates additional PCI scope.
Yeah, and we've had to deal, you know, going back to the original question as well, we've had to deal with very complex environments, some that had multi-tenanted, white labelable, I don't know if that's a word, but let's say it is for today, payment systems with multiple language support, all of which were pulling a bunch of scripts. And so those are sort of fun environments to deal with. But yeah, it's that engagement with where do you want to draw the line between business justification, which is, you know, has been one of the change from 4.0 to 4.01, adding that business justification to the scripts, adds a layer of gray, if you will, right? Some blurriness.
Even some global merchants, or obviously if you're on eBay and various other sites they sell to the world, if you're using processors in different regions because maybe you don't support in North America, so you've got a different one in Europe, you've got a different one in Africa, a different one in Asia, different in Australia, or regionally where you are, you have to take into account the scripts that have to be per acquirer or per payment processor, which can add that level of complexity, especially when you're selling across the globe.
Thank you, team, so much. I have a final question for you, Robert. So you're not getting out of this easy. I hope you know that. Okay, this is an obvious question, but I have to ask it. The question is, okay, we know that we have a deadline, April 1st, 2025. Let's say I'm working with my auditor right now. I'm working with the control gap. Do I still need to worry, because I'm doing the audit right now, do I still need to worry about the 6431161? And I heard from you today that 12.8, especially if I'm working with third-party, right, providers. So is that something I will be working with your team on? And especially that I think I still have more time?
You absolutely have as much time as you need. So keep in mind that whether you're compliant or not, PCI is a journey. And if you have a deadline that you need to meet, having conversations with your acquirer, with a QSA like ourselves, to support you to be able to say, look, we are going through the process. We have found some things. It's going to take some time. You need to be able to come prepared with, this is how much time it's going to take for us to implement this. This may delay us from being able to attest as compliant on our normal date. The sooner you can get in front of your acquirer and explain that, the easier it is for them to be able to either grant you special circumstance or be able to come to the table and be able to work with you. A lot of people feel it's us versus them, but what we found with a lot of the work that we do with companies fall in and out of compliance. Why? Because there's constant change. And that's a normal thing. And we've worked very hard with all of our customers to break that stigma of, oh my God, I'm not compliant, and now I'm going to be fined and this and that. It's not, the brands and everyone is not in the business of finding organizations if they are truly on their PCI journey and have a serious sort of mantra around security and a serious review of the security controls they are. If you're working towards it, there's always ways to have conversations with your acquirer, with the QSA, And in the exact scenario you talked about, if we were in the middle of an assessment, right now, those requirements are not required, they're best practice. So they would be noted as not applicable. In your next iteration or next year, post April 1st, 2025, we would be looking for that evidence. But in the meantime, we would look to give you recommendations on, here's things we found along the way as part of the analysis we've done. You should take this into consideration. Then we can certainly have our consulting team come and assist you with figuring out what's the right solution to implement. But let's first figure out how large the challenge you have is, and then look for tools or strategies that make sense.
Yeah, one thing though, if there ever was an incident post April 1, 2025, and 643 and 1161 were not in the previous audit, then the council, at least my understanding is the council still expects you to comply with 643 and 1161 at that date.
If you're compromised, all bets are off, because at that point, you're going to have a forensic investigation. They're going to be looking for, how did the compromise occur? Whether you were compliant at the time or not. Now, again, discussions with the QSA, your acquirer, the brands will happen during that experience. But from an assessment perspective, we're going to help you get there as fast as possible. But you have that, there's some gray area there. So let's have a conversation. Feel free to reach out to us, and let's have that conversation.
Awesome. Thank you, team, so much. We have 4 minutes left. I learned a ton myself. We spoke about the SAC levels and how we can comply. We spoke about the iFrame and how the script change can actually play a role in the iFrame. Robert, you highlighted very clearly that it's not just about securing the script, but also the page that holds the script. We spoke about the responsibility that goes beyond the server. It's also the content that will be served on the consumer browser. Thomas, you spoke about the browser support, which is a critical thing for us, because an 8%, if we don't support those browsers, that's revenue loss or maybe an opportunity for a hack that can happen in an organization. Robert, you spoke about the idea of the PCI 4.0 as to demonstrate that policy is implemented properly. And you spoke about change management will be a big part of that in the PCI 4.0 and 4.1 moving forward. I think the last thing we spoke about is, where do you actually draw the boundaries, especially with the 12.8 requirement when you're dealing with third parties. I think Robert and Thomas, both of you guys also spoke about how can I deal with international organization with multiple regions and multiple payment processing. Thank you again. Thank you so much. I want to thank the audience today. We have, by the way, 38 participants today. There was a lot of questions coming in. So here's a big takeaway. As Data Stealth, we want to thank Control Gap for all their help. We're going to send you a recording of this session, an executive summary. The second thing we're going to do is that if there's any question that we could not answer, please reach out to us. We'll make sure to answer. If you have more questions, you have a Control Gap, Robert will be able to answer. If you want to know more about how Data Stealth can help from our platform perspective, definitely would love to answer that. And the big shout out is to our PCI community. Thank you so much for joining today. If you have any question, check Control Gap, check their website, and check Data Stealth as well. And looking forward to see you in future webinars.
Thank you.
Great talking to you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye for now.